Greetings and welcome to what I'm calling an addendum to the video I just uploaded a couple of days ago, the episode 3 on black photography books, and I'm doing an expanded thoughts because there's certain things that I wanted to say in the last video, but because of the interest of time and trying to make videos that are like between 10 and 15 minutes long, I couldn't really get to. But I feel that 3 of these books that I spoke about the other day deserve a little bit more, a little bit more talking about. So the first one I'm going to talk about is the Vanderzee book right here that I had. Now I want to expand more about James Vanderzee and who he is. His sister was Jenny Louise Vanderzee, and she later became Madame Toussaint Welcome. And she was one of the only black female movie makers during the silent film era. Now Vanderzee himself was very prominent in the Harlem Renaissance. He was basically the photographer of the Renaissance. He took pictures of a lot of, the artists of the Harlem Renaissance. He took a lot of pictures of the people living in Harlem at that time. He was the go-to portraiture. He was commissioned by Marcus Garvey, the father of Pan-Africanism, and he commissioned him to photograph himself as well as members of the UNIA to show, the dignity and the black pride of the UNIA. Because of certain circumstances with the, stock market crash and the Great Depression, he went broke during the 30s and 40s and 50s because, there wasn't too many customers, because a lot of the customers that he had didn't have any money, and they also were able to buy their own personal cameras, so that kind of, made it hard for him to make a living. It wasn't until about 1967 when a young photographer named Reginald McGee was, they were working on a project for showcasing Harlem during the Renaissance, and McGee was looking for photos of the Harlem Renaissance, and he was, canvassing Harlem looking for anybody who had photos of the Renaissance period. He came across Vanderzee's studio, and of course he asked if he had photographs of the Harlem Renaissance, which of course he had because he was the most prominent photographer during that period. And McGee looked through the photos and was like, you have to be a part of this show. And the show was Harlem on My Mind, and it was at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in 1969, and it reintroduced the world to James Vanderzee. And after that, a lot of exhibits featured his work, and he became, famous later on in his life. And in the 1980s, before he died, he took several photos of prominent black figures of the time. He took photos of Bill Cosby, Lou Rawls, Muhammad Ali, and Basquiat, and he used the backdrops that he used from back in the 20s and 30s to photograph these current black figures. And in return, Basquiat actually has a painting of which he named Vanderzee, which is dedicated to James Vanderzee. Next, I want to go back to the Black is Beautiful photography book by Kwame Brathwaite and expand upon the importance of Kwame Brathwaite. I'm very big on paying homage to those who came before me as photographers and artists, and definitely, Kwame Brathwaite is definitely a photographer that I need to pay homage to, because without what he did back in those time periods with the natural hairstyles and the Black is Beautiful movement, me, myself, and others, we couldn't be doing what we're doing, which is following in his footsteps. When he was young, him and his brother Elombe Brath, who I'm going to get to in a little bit, but they created the African Jazz Art Society and Studios in 1956, which was to introduce jazz as a black art form, and they held several concerts in Harlem, and I also believe they held some in the Village as well. And in 1962 they started Grandasa Models, which was a collective of black women with natural hairstyles, and they started their own pageant in 1962, which was called Naturally 62, and they held them for like 5 years after that, annually, and it was a black beauty pageant, and the women were showing their black African pride with their natural hairstyles. In addition to taking photos of these beautiful natural hair women, he also took photos of concerts. Like, he took photos of James Brown concerts, Stevie Wonder in concert, Bob Marley, Miles Davis, and a variety of other jazz artists. Now, I mentioned his brother Elombe Brath, and Elombe Brath is very important because he is a Pan-African icon. In the 60s, Stokely Carmichael, aka Kwame Brathwaite, called Elombe Brath the Dean of Harlem Nationalists. He co-founded the Patrice Lumumba Foundation, as well as co-founding the December 12th movement. And he fought for the causes of, Africans in the diaspora and on the continent of Africa. He also was instrumental in fighting for the freedom of the Central Park 5. A stretch of 125th Street in Harlem is named after him, right there between 125th and the corner of, I believe it's Adam Clayton Powell Jr. Boulevard. Is called Elombe Brath Way. So do some research on Elombe Brath, especially if you're a Pan-African such as myself. You definitely need to know who he was, as he passed away in 2014. So do some research on Elombe Brath. Last but not least, The Majesty of the Black Woman by Arthur Tcholakian, and I looked it up and found out how you pronounce his name is Tcholakian. Now, Tcholakian is not a black photographer. He was actually born in Jerusalem and is of Armenian descent, and he started out as a fashion photographer before deciding to do this book, The Majesty of the Black Woman. The book came out in 1971. In 1973, they held an art exhibit with photographs from this book, and it was held at the New Yorker Club in the Time Life building. The exhibit was attended by Marian Anderson, Alice Childress, Betty Shabazz, Ruby Dee, and Nina Simone, who are all in the book. And they had an article that I found in the New York Times that was talking about this art exhibit. If you can, just Google The Majesty of the Black Woman and you will find this article. It's very interesting to read about this article from like 1973. Now, I found this book at the Photography Center here in Troy. I bought it for $20. If you look on Amazon, you can find this book anywhere from like $40 to $400, $600. I've even seen $1,000 because the book is rare. Now, when I'm at a used bookstore, I'm pretty much like a crate digger, looking for vinyl records, except I look for rare photography books that, are hard to find. And, there's a lot of used bookstores in my area, so I'm able to find gems like this. And that's all I wanted to say about these 3 books. I just wanted to expand more upon them, and I hope you guys look for them yourself, or try to find some books that are rare and out of print that are photography. And if you do find some that are very interesting, let me know. Once again, hit the subscribe button, follow me on Instagram, at R. Cooper Photography. I thank everybody. Bless and love.